I'm Jim Emison. We're in Alamo, Tennessee. Today is April the 12th, 2002, and I am here to interview my father, Theo Emison. This interview is taking place as a part of the Legal History Project of the Fellows of the Tennessee Bar Foundation. Dad, state your full name, please.
Theophilus James Emison.
When were you born?
February 5th, 1915.
Where?
In Alamo, here in Alamo at the northwest quadrant of West Main and Branch Street.
Was there a clinic there?
No, I was born in my grandfather's home.
All right. Who were your parents?
My father was Joseph Brantley Emison, and my mother was Lucille Johnson.
Where were they born?
They were both born here in Alamo.
Where was Joseph Brantley Emison educated?
In the local school here in Alamo, and then at Vanderbilt University School of Dentistry.
Do you know when he graduated?
Yes, in 1910.
And was he alive when you were born, Dad?
No, he died in November of 1914 before I was born in February of 1915.
How did that come about? How did that happen?
He and a Dr. Downey met in Dyersburg, Tennessee, looking for office space to open a clinic in Dyer County. And there was an epidemic of typhoid fever. He had lunch there, and in the incubating period, he was taken with typhoid fever and died. They had no vaccine for it at that time.
Where did he practice dentistry?
Practiced here in Alamo.
Where was his office?
On the south side of Court Square.
After you were practicing law in Alamo, did you have any clients who had been patients of your dad's?
I'm sure I did. I do not remember any clients, but I know that after I was out of college and back here practicing law, that I would have people come up to me and show me a filling in their tooth and say, "Your dad did that for me."
Did he have any connection with the legal system or the judicial system at any time in Crockett County?
Yes, he did. His father, my grandfather, was very political. My grandfather, J.W. Emison, was county court clerk from 1902 till 1910. And when his term expired as county court clerk, the chancellor was going to appoint him as clerk and master. And the clerk and master resigned before the end of my grandfather's term, so the chancellor appointed my father, Joseph Brantley Emison, as clerk and master while he was still in college, and he held the office until his father's term expired as county court clerk. Then he resigned and his father became clerk and master.
Tell me about your mother. Where was she born and raised?
She was born in the same home in which I was born, here in Alamo. her parents were Theophilus Green, Dr. Theophilus Green Johnson, for whom I was named, and Anna Nebbett. Her family was from LaGrange, Tennessee, and down close to Germantown. There was a large German community there. And she came here as a school teacher, and my grandfather met and married her.
Where did your grandfather, Theophilus Green Johnson, get his medical education?
At Vanderbilt.
Do you know when he went there or when he graduated?
No, I really do not.
Did he have a medical practice that you recall?
No, he, was sort of an apprentice back then. After you went to about a 6-month course, a medical course, then you rode with a doctor. And he rode with Dr. Fleming, who was in practice here. And he couldn't stand the sight of blood.
So what did he do?
So he decided that he would be a pharmacist, and he opened the first drugstore in Crockett County.
And do you remember his drugstore?
Yes, I do.
Tell me about it.
Well, there was a drugstore on, it was located on the south side of Court Square, and facing north. And the east side of the store was given to the drugstore. The west side of the store was a general grocery store. And I can remember as a child going there. He was in business with his half-brother, Samuel Ernest Johnson, so that we paid for everything we got because of the partnership. And I would go there with 2 pennies and come back with a sack full of candy back in those days. Now you take the sack of money and come back with a couple of pieces of candy.
Did you have any brothers or sisters?
Yes, I had a brother, Joseph Brantley Emison, Jr. Joseph is now dead. He studied pharmacy, actually wanted to be a doctor, and we just simply could not afford that sort of an education. So he became a pharmacist and owned the Speedway Pharmacy in Memphis, located at Jackson Avenue and Decatur Street. And after he had been operating the drugstore for, I guess, 10 or 12 years, he bought out a Wilkerson wholesale drug company in Memphis, and ran that wholesale drug for a while. And when the antibiotics came in, they were so expensive that he really did not have the funding to carry his customers for a 30-day period and take the discounts. So he sold to Meyer Brothers of St. Louis, and they retained him as president of the Tennessee Corporation.
After your father's death, where did you and Uncle Joe and Mama live?
Mama was meaning my mother, Lucille Johnson Emison.
Absolutely.
We went we went back to her father's home, my grandfather.
Was that Theophilus Green Johnson?
Theophilus Green Johnson.
In relation to our law office, where was that house?
About two or three blocks west of here.
Did you grow up there?
Yes, I did.
What was life like in that household?
Well, you know, life was pretty austere in all of the households back at that time. We had no public water supply. Everybody used a well. There were no dairies. Everybody had their own cow in the backyard. And my grandfather had a barn also. And the electricity was privately owned here by a man by the name of Marion Darden. And you could hear the old motor come on about 6 o'clock in the afternoon. We had electricity only from 6 till 10:30 in the evening. And on Wednesday afternoons, which was the ironing afternoon for the ladies. And other than that, there was no electricity 24 hours a day.
How many people lived in your grandfather's household while you were growing up with him?
An aunt, Annie Rooney Johnson, who was later married to an Austin, my brother, my mother, and my grandfather and I.
Tell us a little bit about Alamo when you were a child. What was it like? How many people lived here?
When I was a very small child, I would say about 900 people. The streets were dirt. There were no paved streets at all. And incidentally, in the wintertime, as long as I can remember, my grandfather kept a room ready for people who would get stuck in mud holes and have to spend the night. And I can remember many times, and the next morning they'd get a team of mules to pull their car out, and they'd go on their way.
Were there automobiles in Alamo when you were growing up as a child?
I can remember back when there were only 3 automobiles in the town of Alamo.
Do you remember who owned them?
One was owned by the Fleming family, Dr. Fleming's family. One was owned by a man by the name of Arthur McLean, who lived on West Main Street, the same street. And my uncle, Emmett McClanahan, who was a traveling salesman and used his automobile in travel.
Did you have a radio in the house?
There was no such thing as a radio back in that time.
What's the first memory you have of even the mention of a radio?
Well, my grandfather, Theophilus Green Johnson, read every line of every newspaper that came. And really he kept up with the times, and he called me into the room one day and said, son, said, I have just read where they're going to manufacture a box that you can put here on your table. And a man can speak in New York City, and you can hear him through that box.
How old were you when he told you
Oh,
that?
I guess I was about eight or 10 years old.
What was your reaction to that?
I said, Grandpa, you reckon that'll ever happen?
Now, give us just a little bit of the history of Theophilus Green Johnson's lineage. Who was his father and grandfather? And tell us just a little bit about his grandfather's role in the history of Crockett County.
Theophilus Green Johnson was the son of W.A. Johnson, Washington author, I believe, Johnson, who was the first surveyor of Crockett County and who was circuit court clerk about 1881 to maybe 1886. W.A. Johnson was a son of Isaac M. Johnson, who came to this area in about 1840 and was actually one of the first settlers of this area. He went in mercantile business with a man from Memphis by the name of Cage, and they called this town, a community, Cageville, until after David Crockett was killed at the Alamo, and they named it Crockett County for. When the county was formed, they named the county Crockett and the town Alamo.
When was Crockett County formed?
1971.
1871, baby?
1871.
And tell me about I.M. Johnson or Isaac Miller Johnson's role in the creation of this county.
Well, he circulated a petition as early as 1933.
That's 1833.
I mean,
you're a century
1833.
late.
I'm sorry.
But that's just 1 century.
Yeah, that's all. That's close. But there were about 3 attempts at creating the county before it was finally accomplished. They thought they had it done in 1867, I believe, and took the papers to some member of the legislature from here, and for some reason it just simply was not acted upon. In 1971,
go back a century.
1871, it was adopted, and immediately some gentleman filed an injunction to enjoin the commissioners from organizing the county, and they settled with him by paying him $1,000. He withdrew his suit, and the county then was organized.
What role did Isaac Miller Johnson play in the early days of the government of the county, and how did the county get the land where the courthouse sits today?
Isaac M. Johnson was the first chairman of the county court, Crockett County. And he gave the site for the courthouse, and he gave the site for the First Methodist Church. He owned a farm that ran from what's known as Johnson Street, which forms the east side of the present Court Square, back to Nant Street, which is out east in the eastern part of town.
Do you know if W.A. Johnson had any service in the Civil War?
Yes, he was with Newcomb's regiment under Forrest Command in the Civil War.
Do you know how long he served?
No, I do not. I do not recall. I have known, but...
Tell us just a little more about James Wesley Emison, your grandfather.
James Wesley Emison was first county court clerk, and then clerk and master, and after that he was appointed postmaster and served as postmaster until the end of his life.
Let's go back to your childhood now, okay?
That's way back.
Back on West Main Street in Alamo. Did you have any pets as a child?
I had a white kitten once, and my mother put a little white suit on me. I guess I must have been about 3 years old. Got me out on the front porch and was going to take my picture holding my kitten. And somebody's dog ran up about that time, and that cat ran up and down me and around me and scratched me all over.
Did you
so
ever?
We did away with it. We gave the cat away.
Did you ever have a goat?
Yes, I did.
Tell us about your goat.
J.C. McLean, who had been sheriff of Crockett County. At the time, my father was clerk and master. Lived on a farm north of town, and he had some goats. And he approached my mother. Wouldn't I like to have a goat as a pet? And he'd be glad to loan us a goat. So we got the goat, and my aunt who lived with us, Annie Rooney Johnson, had a harness made and a little cart and a harness made for that goat. And got him out in the front yard, set me down in that cart, and that goat had been back in the barn lot with some food back there. And as soon as they set me down in that cart, that goat took off for the barn lot and hung a wheel on the fence post, threw me out of the cart and tore the cart all to pieces, and we got rid of the goat. So my pets didn't turn out too well.
You've told me a story on occasion about, I think you were about 12 years old when you had a health problem. You had some arthritis. Do you recall that?
Yes, actually I believe I was only about 8 years old. I would I would wake at night with almost exactly the same hour and the same minute, with excruciating pain in my right leg. And none of the local doctors could make a diagnosis. One of them recommended that they put a cast on my leg. And my mother just really wasn't satisfied completely about that. So she took me. We went by train to Memphis. Dr. Willis Campbell, the founder of famous Campbell's Clinic in Memphis, had just become recognized nationally as an orthopedic surgeon. And he examined me and decided that it was poison from my tonsils that was causing arthritis. They removed my tonsils, made medication out of it, gave me shots, shot that back into my body, and it cured me.
What do you remember about Dr. Willis Campbell?
One of the sweetest persons I ever knew. He was a great, big Arkansas man, and his hands were big and heavy. He was what I would call a real gentle giant. He was a wonderful person, and back then doctors took care of their own, and he, knowing that I was the child of a dentist, deceased dentist, I don't believe he charged anything for his fees and time, just a very small fee for my tonsillectomy and things of that kind, and he was most kind.
Tell us about your school years in Alamo, your education here.
Well, they were uneventful. Because of the arthritis, I was restricted in athletic activities for a while, so I somehow turned to public speaking. And when I was in the 7th grade of school, I won the county oratorical contest. And that was when one of my teachers, Raymond Jennings, who was a good friend of Fred P. Warren. Fred Warren was an attorney here at the time. Encouraged me to study law, and that's the first time that I had really given it any thought. But later on, I was in an oratorical contest. They had a contest in Martin, Tennessee. The Martin Rotary Club was given a $250 scholarship for the winner of an oratorical contest on world peace, subject world peace. And I entered and won that, and that paid my tuition the first year of college.
How did you find out about that contest?
A neighbor friend of ours found out about it and told me about it, and as a matter of fact, took me up there because I had no automobile.
Who was it?
Leslie Vernon.
I remember him. How many of the speaking contests were you in?
Beg pardon?
How many oratorical contests did you enter?
Well, I entered each year from, 7th, 8th grade and my 4 years of high school, and then that contest at Martin.
Did you win them all?
Yes, I did.
Who were your competitors?
Well, as it turned out, my chief competitor was Chancellor George T. Lewis.
Where did he grow up?
In Bells, Tennessee.
How far away is that?
5 miles.
Is that in Crockett County?
In Crockett County, and we were roommates at college.
When did the two of you first butt heads in a speaking contest?
I would say it must have been about 1930, yeah.
Would that have been in high school?
Yeah.
Do you remember the event?
Yes, I do.
Tell me about it.
Well, all I can say is that you were called upon to make a speech, and you made it, and you either won or you lost.
Who judged the contests?
Now that I do not know.
Were you and George friends after that?
Oh, sure, yeah, very close. We were very close friends the rest of his life.
Who was your favorite teacher in the Alamo Public Schools, if you had one?
I had two, Raymond Jennings for one, and Miss Carrie Bowles.
What did they teach?
Raymond taught the 7th grade, and Miss Carrie Bowles taught English.
What was there about those two teachers that made them your favorites?
Well, they tried to inspire you and motivate you. Miss Bowles was very conscientious, although she knew only a small percent of the students at that time were going on to college, yet she wanted to give every one of her students the benefit of high school English that would prepare them for college. And when I first went to the University of Tennessee, the only exam they gave you, entrance exam, was a placement exam in English. And unfortunately, I placed in the advanced group.
Why was that unfortunate?
Well, it made it very difficult.
Well,
the expectations were very high.
Do you attribute your advanced placement to Ms. Bowles?
I do.
Why is that?
Well, because she didn't let you say, where am I at?
I forgot to ask you this question when we were talking about your growing up on Main Street in Alamo. Do you remember Armistice Day?
Yes, I do.
Tell me about it.
I was a little less than 3 years old, but I remember it. On the 11th of November, they had a huge bonfire on the west side of Court Square and living on West Main. From a bedroom in our home, you could see the fire. And while the bonfire was going, my mother bought a dishpan and 2 huge mixing spoons, one for me and one for my brother. And we sat there in celebration and beat that dishpan, the bottom of that dishpan.
Was that in 1918?
It was, yes.
I have a picture of your granddad, Theophilus Green Johnson, and his wife, your grandmother, Anna Nebbit Johnson, seated on their front porch, and behind them in the window there's a little flag with 2 gold stars.
It indicated 2 sons in the service.
Who were they?
My uncles, Nebbit Johnson and Hamlet Johnson.
Was that in World War I?
That was in World War I.
Okay.
Although they monitored Uncle Neb real closely because of his name, Nebbit. The Nebbits were German.
And his grandfather had been an immigrant from Germany?
He had, yes.
And he was?
John Bowen Nebbit.
Do you know about when he immigrated?
No, I do not.
Where did he settle?
In LaGrange, Tennessee, and about the only thing I know of him, he was at one time, I believe, mayor of LaGrange or chairman of something if it was unincorporated, and he was also superintendent for many years, superintendent of the Methodist Church, and there's a rose window in his honor in the Methodist Church at LaGrange, Tennessee.
Tell us what you know about our name Theophilus and how and where you got it.
Well, I got it from my grandfather, Theophilus Green Johnson. I really cannot tell you where he got it. I'm really thinking that my grandmother, his wife, was a very devout person, and I expect she influenced my mother in naming me Theophilus after her husband, but how he got his name I do not know. It means people of God.
Now, when you were growing up in Alamo, did you work ever during that period of time?
Yes, I did.
What was your first job?
First job, I guess, was mowing yards. And
tell me all about it. How you did it, who you did it with, and how much you liked it.
You did it with an old, real tight, unmotorized lawnmower. And on a hot August day, it was real work. I mowed the yard of a doctor here, who back in those days, the doctors had difficulty making a living, as strange as it seems now. But they would pay him with eggs and chickens and sausage and things of that kind. He would give me, it was $1 yard, and he would give me a check, and lots of times I had to hold that check for 2 or 3 weeks before it would clear the bank. And he was a leading doctor in Crockett County and was a good friend of my father's. And my mother has told me about this doctor that my father told her that he had seen Dr. Hopper operate and that he was one of the best surgeons that he had ever witnessed.
All right. What was your next job after the August days got your lawn mowing stopped?
Was janitor of the Bank Alamo. I followed my brother when he resigned as janitor. I took over the janitorship of the Bank Alamo.
Tell us about that job.
$4 a month.
And what did you do to earn that gigantic stipend?
Swept the bank every day and mopped the floor as a tile floor. Mopped it about twice a month. Is the least frequently I could do it. But you had to get a water jug, and I'd have to fill that with water and set it on the stand. Make fire. They had heat by a coal stove, and I'd have to make a fire before I went to school. I'd have to make a fire in that bank.
How long did you do that?
For at least 3 or 4 years.
And how old were you?
Well, I guess I started when I was about 13 and did that till I was 16 or 17. And Herbert Perry, who was the cashier and later president of the bank, gave me an honorary title, draft clerk. They had no air conditioning, and he said my job was to raise and lower the windows and control the draft. So he made me the draft clerk.
Did you have any other jobs during the summers when you were growing up?
Yes, I was janitor of the Methodist Church, and I also worked at the what they call fruit shed at the depot in the summers.
Where was that in relation to your home?
About 3 blocks west of my home.
Tell us about that job.
At that time, they were shipping, I guess, 6 or 8 carloads of strawberries from here. And I had different jobs. One on the end of the strawberry crate, you had to swish it with some glue and paste a big strawberry and who grew them and who shipped them and so forth. And also taking the crates from the shed into the cars, the ice cars, and loading the cars. And also, we shipped a lot of tomatoes from here, and I had about the same job there. I was doing some kind of work all the time. On Saturdays, I worked for W.C. Hayes, Clarence Hayes Produce. He sold feeds and seeds and fertilizers. And as a high school student, I worked with a black man by the name of Landis Kuntz. And he'd take one end of the sack, and I'd take the other end of the sack, and we'd load a wagon or load a truck. And that's the type of work. It's all manual labor.
Did you ever have a paper route?
Yes, I had a route for the Jackson Sun and the Memphis Press Scimitar.
How did you deliver those?
Finally, I got me a pony. I got tired of walking, and I got a pony and helped with the delivery.
Now,
incidentally, a little earlier than that, my brother and I had a donkey. I don't know where it came from, and I don't know where it went, but I remember we had one because Branch Street at that time was an unimproved lane. And there was a gate off of that lane onto the barn lot that my grandfather owned. And we were riding that donkey and intended to go down the lane, and the donkey turned sharply into that lot, and we both went off. We went in the direction we thought the donkey was going. But I recall that about that donkey, and that's the only thing I remember about him.
I've got a picture of you and Uncle Joe riding a donkey in my office that I retrieved.
Yeah, I remember that picture.
home.
I hadn't seen it in a long time.
Tell us about your college years, Dad. Where did you start?
Started at UT Knoxville with 3,500 students.
What year was that?
It was a big college, big college. That was fall of 1932.
How did you choose UT in Knoxville?
Well, we considered a long time Vanderbilt, of course, because my grandfather and my father, my maternal grandfather and my father had both attended Vandy, but tuition was really too stiff. We had to really watch financing. While my father was ill, he had an insurance policy that the premium came due on it. And he asked a friend of his, or a friend of his offered to be sure and take care of that premium and let my father take care of it when he got well. They thought he was going to get well at that time. And the man failed to do it, and the insurance expired just days before his death. He had some other insurance, but not enough for us to live lavishly. We never had an automobile, and we had, as I say, watch our finances, and it was a financial decision, actually. I could attend UT Knoxville cheaper than I could attend Vanderbilt.
How did you get up there your freshman year?
And
what was that journey like?
Plymouth automobile that was named the Yellow Peril.
Who owned it?
It was Dr. Fannis Taylor. He later became Dr. Fannis Taylor, a gynecologist, practiced in Memphis. He also was from Bells. There were 3 Bells students at Knoxville the year before I went. They had attended. J.W. Evans, Fannis Taylor, and George Lewis. And I went with them to Knoxville, and that car took us 17 hours. We had a flat tire right in front of Vanderbilt. We were humiliated. But let me go back to to our start of that trip. George was a little more cosmopolitan than I was, and as we left Bell's, he said, "Wait just a minute, Fanny." He said, "Drive up this little lane here." So we went up a little lane, and George went up to the house, and he came back with a pint of liquor. And so we took that on our trip with us, but we didn't imbibe on the way up. But anyway, they were working on the roads. We had to go up, I believe, to Livingston. We had to go way up north and almost into Kentucky. And it, as I say, it took us 17 hours.
What's the most memorable part of that trip for you besides watching Chancellor George T. Lewis buy that bootleg whiskey in Bell's?
Well, the most memorable part was having that flat tire. Having that flat tire in front of Vanderbilt campus.
How did Dr. Taylor's car get the name the Yellow Peril?
Well, I guess we felt it was perilous to drive in it, but I do not know. While George and I were rooming out on Fifth Avenue in the Sturkey apartment right next to a Christian church there, within walking distance of the Regus, the old Regus restaurant. In fact, of the business, I had a meal ticket at the original Regus restaurant. And I wish I had kept it after it had been punched out, but I didn't. Where was I? You'll have to bring me back.
You and George were living in the Sturkey boarding house on Fifth Avenue or 5th Street in Knoxville.
George's father was very fluent. In fact, of the business, G.T. Lewis, at one time he was a major stockholder of Union Planters Bank. But he made George fill out a slip of everything, itemize everything that he spent money for. An expense account, monthly. And, but George was able to buy a lot of books. And he bought what's known as a bull-nose Franklin. It was an old Franklin automobile, and it had a nose that just went down almost to the ground. And we were at that time we were members of the Pi Kappa Alpha fraternity. At that time it was on Gay Street at 15th.
Okay.
At 15th and, no, 13th.
Okay.
And the street is almost straight down. I mean, it's at a real angle.
That must be Clinch.
Well, no, Clinch, it ran into Clinch.
Okay.
And it was on West Clinch at 13th Street. We parked on 13th Street, and we hadn't been in the fraternity house very long until the freshman came in and said, Mr. Lewis said, isn't that your automobile that's parked out there on 13th Street? And George said, yes, it was. Said, well, said, it just broke loose and ran down and knocked down a utility pole. And George said, we better go. And we left, but it didn't damage the car too much.
Now, how many years in undergrad school did you spend at UT Knoxville?
Well, I moved to Southwestern in Memphis my sophomore year.
Why did you do that?
Because my brother offered me a part-time job working in a drugstore, and
Did you take it?
I worked about 18 hours a week.
Where was the drugstore?
On Jackson Avenue at Decatur.
Is that the one Uncle Joe owned at the time?
He later bought it. He was working for a Dr. Folis. And
what was your position in that drugstore?
jerking soda, of course.
Well, tell us about that.
And front, Dr. Folis insisted on us doing suggestive salesmanship, you know. If someone came in and they wanted a cough syrup, then you tried to sell them Vic salve to rub on their chest, something of that kind. So I worked the front of a drugstore.
Well, what do you recall about your days as a soda jerk?
Sleepy all the time.
Why is that?
Because I worked 18 hours and tried to, and I was taking a full-time course.
What was your pay in the Speedway drugstore?
35 cents an hour.
Where did you live when you were going to Southwestern that year?
My Aunt Anna Rooney Johnson was then married to T. Austin, and they had moved to Memphis, and we lived with her.
How many years did you spend at Southwestern before heading back to Knoxville?
Just one. I had at Southwestern an English professor, and I can't call his name right now. It's been a long time ago. But I do remember that in order to pass his course, we had to memorize a large portion of Canterbury-Tallis. One that a praily would sure a sota the drought of March hath pierced to the rota, and bathed every vein in swish liquor, of which nature engenders a flow. Man, I spent a lot of time, we all did, memorizing that, because we had to do that before we'd pass the course.
What in those days were the requirements of admission to law school?
2 years pre-law.
And did you apply to law school while you were in that second year of undergrad work at Southwestern?
Didn't have to. All you had to do was show up.
You did not submit an application to go to law school?
I just went and matriculated.
How did you know when to be there?
Oh, well, I knew about that. I inquired about that, but
Was George Lewis in law school at the time you went? Did he start when you did, or
he was a year ahead of me.
And what year was it when you actually started law school?
1935.
Dad, we've been at this about an hour now, and we're going to take a break for just a minute and stretch our legs and then come back and talk about your career with the law. How about that?
That'll be fine.
Well, Dad, you had finished your second year at Southwestern and driven up to Knoxville with George Lewis and showed up at the law school. How did you convince them to admit you?
They met you with open arms.
Where was the law school in that year?
It was on Cumberland, next to the Church Street Methodist Church.
Church Street or Henley Street?
Henley Street Methodist Church.
What year was that you started law school?
In 1935.
Describe that law school building to us.
Well, it had about 3.5 or 4 stories. It was old, big, drafty, cool in the summer and cool in the winter. The library was on, I believe, the 3rd floor. Had classrooms on the ground and the 2nd floor.
And what was the length of the course of law school study then?
3 years.
Who were some of your classmates and schoolmates that were there during the years you were?
Well, during the years I was, John High School, who was later Attorney General in Memphis, Tommy Dunlap, George Lewis, O.C. Armitage, Arthur Seymour.
What were the costs of your law school education back in 1935 and 7?
I really do not remember exactly about law school. I know my freshman year there, the cost was about $350.
Excuse me, go ahead.
But it was more than that in law school, but the exact amount I couldn't tell you.
What effect did the Depression have on your college days?
Really, it was a benefit, oddly enough, because we were on a fixed income, and it made prices lower. Your room and board was lower, and in an odd way, it was beneficial, actually, to me.
Did you work during your law school days?
No, I did not.
Tell us about your professors or your favorite one and some of the courses you liked. And how you got along.
Well, Harold Warner, Professor Warner, was one of the most beloved professors, I guess, has ever been there. Dean Wicker, who taught trust and who pulled, I believe, me and two other boys off of the law review board and put us to annotating the law of trust. And I think that's because we couldn't write real well, and he figured we could research better than we could write. But Harold Warner taught real estate, and he was very thorough, and really prepared you for the practice of real estate law.
Were there any women in your law school class or in law school while you were there, Dad?
Yes, there were, I believe, two in law school at the time. No, I can't. I do not remember their name.
Any minority students in law school during your days?
No. No, they were not.
Why was Harold Warner one of your favorites?
Well, he was one of those inspirational teachers. He made you really want to learn and understand, and made it interesting. And he had a real concern, a personal concern for his students.
How did you go about studying while you were in law school? Did you do it alone? Did you do it in groups? Did you have a regular routine? Tell us about that.
I did it mostly alone. There was another boy from Crockett County who went to law school or signed up for law school, matriculated the same year I did, Henry Hill Raines. And I believe it was Dean Witham that came in and made a talk to the freshmen. And one of his remarks was that you will need to study just like you would office hours if you were a lawyer. You're really beginning now to be a lawyer. And if you are not willing to put in that time, then you're wasting your time and our time. And Henry leaned over to me and said, "Let's go back and get our money." And I said, "No, I've got to stay, Henry." And he did go back and later went to Cumberland. And I believe got his law degree but never practiced.
Did it make any difference in your law school career that you were from a small town like Alamo?
No, well, it may have made me work a little harder.
Why is that?
I felt the need of it. The students who were from the larger towns and had fathers or uncles and so forth who were lawyers and who knew the faculty. I don't mean that they would be prejudiced toward them, but there was a natural inclination that I felt that I had to overachieve a little bit.
Well, tell us about the social life of a law student in 1935 at UT Knoxville. Did you ever make it away from the books?
Not in my freshman year. In my freshman year of law, I put in almost my full-time classes and studying. In my last 2 years, I did not have to.
Why is that?
It just seemed to come easy, and be very frank, once you've established yourself with your professors, I think they're expecting to give you a fairly good grade, and it's easier for you to make good grades.
Well, back to the social life. Tell us about what the social life of a second and third year law student in 1936 and 7
Well, of course,
was like.
if you were a member of a fraternity, you had tea dances, and you were invited to sororities and other fraternity tea dances. And, you'd go to the movies occasionally, and always to the football games.
What do you remember about those, Dad?
Well, I remember General Nealon, and I remember some of his outstanding players like Beatty Feathers, George Caffago, Fox and Bartholomew, and there was a small boy by the name of Harp, Pony Harp. And I remember that they were all low-scoring games because there was very little passing. It was mostly precision, blocking, and running game. We were playing Kentucky, and on a kickoff, Pony Red Harp in the last few minutes of the game is 0-0. And he ran the entire length of the field, returned. It was the first time I'd ever seen a kickoff return for a score. And that made a real impression on me.
Did the law students at UT participate in Carnicus in those days, the spring festival?
Yes, and
were there ever any hijinks related to that period of time in your academic life?
Well, for 2 or 3 years before I got there, the law students and the ag students were having a little controversy, you might say. And the law students would do things to the ag students' float. And a group, the year I was a freshman in law school, a group of law students got up on the 4th floor and from that distance you could drop an egg and it'd fall right into the center of the street. So they had some eggs, and when the agriculture float came along, they let those eggs go.
Did any of them find their mark?
Oh, all of them found their mark. And that evening, we had Copernicus, you had stunts, and they were on the auditorium on the stage, and my zoology professor, who had been my zoology professor when I was in over on the hill, was bald-headed, and he was in the audience, and some audacious law student threw an egg and hit him on the head. And it's said that he used some real bad language. He wiped that egg off of his head. So they had an inquisition, and they made all the law students sign in blood that they would never, never, never participate in anything like that again, and wouldn't observe anything if it went on. And that put a stop to it, because they were fixing to throw a bunch of law students out of school.
Well, you made it through, obviously.
Yeah, well, I wasn't in the egg throwing bunch.
Tell us about your graduation.
Well, my mother and brother came up for my graduation, and needless to say, I was glad when they put that sheepskin in my palm of my hand. I was elated.
Did they have a formal bar review, bar preparation course?
No, they did not.
Where and how did you prepare for the bar examination?
Well, there was generally circulated a list. I do not know where it came from, but it was not a secretive thing, and it was no illegality about it. It was questions that different ones of the law students over the years remembered and told somebody, and they wrote down. And I got one of those lists, and a first cousin of mine that summer would ask the questions, and I would answer them. And that's the way I reviewed for the bar.
Where did you take the bar exam?
In Memphis.
How long was it?
2 days.
What was the date of your admission? Do you remember that?
August of 1937.
And where did you begin your law practice?
Well, for the first, until, I don't believe I actually got that license until November, although it was dated in August. And from November till February, I worked in the office of Fred P. Warren, an attorney here who had received an appointment as attorney for the Bituminous Coal Commission in Washington. And he did not really have a heavy law practice, but he had some Prudential Insurance Company loans that were in various stages, and he wanted me to complete those for him. And I did. In February of '38, I moved to a frame two-room building that's on this same site as our present law office.
Did you consider going elsewhere to practice law?
Yes, I did. I really considered at one time staying in Knoxville, and George Lewis, who at that time was with Warren Walker and Cox in Memphis, was very insistent that I come down there. He wanted me to practice in Memphis, and I went to the law firm of Charlie O'Brien and Maxwell.
Was that Charlie Bryan or O'Brien?
I believe now that you mention it, it was just simply Charlie Bryan.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he offered me a place in the library with a library chair and legal pad, and pointed out to me that some of the best-known lawyers in West Tennessee at the time were Ewell Weakley of Dyersburg, Tommy Weakley's grandfather, John Buchanan Avery of Alamo here, Emison of Humboldt, and asked me why I had not considered staying in my hometown. And he made it sound pretty good and pretty plausible. That in connection with the request of Fred Warren to finish out these things in his office, made me decide to stay on here.
So it's about February 1938 that you first arrive at the site where we sit today.
That I really started practicing law, that's correct.
Tell us about your law office. Did you own it?
No, I rented it for $4 a month.
What was it like?
Well, it was a two office building, storage in the back office, and I practiced law in the front office. I had a 1938 Mickey Code, single volume it was, annotated, and a portable typewriter.
Where had you bought that?
Well, I hadn't bought it. Leslie Sims, the publisher of the paper, the county paper,
The Crockett Times?
Crockett Times, loaned it to me. Incidentally, Leslie Sims' son, Robert Sims, who was an assistant secretary of the Navy and also a vice president of National Geographic, has moved back to Alamo to make his retirement, make his home.
Okay, so you had the 1938 code, one volume, you had a portable typewriter. What else?
Well, I had some legal size paper, some second sheets. Those were the thin sheets you put the carbon in between. You had no copying machine. You had to make a copy of everything. And when you had to make 2 or 3 copies, it got real complicated.
Who did your typing?
I did for the first 3 years I practiced law.
Did you enjoy that?
Hated it. I despised that typewriter.
How long did you have the one that Mr. Sims had loaned you?
Well, in about 3 years, I bought a regular desk typewriter, an old Underwood that's still in our back office there. It's not operational, but we still have it as a relic. And hired a secretary. And I took that portable typewriter and I took it to my front door and had every intention of throwing that thing out in the street, and I remembered that it didn't belong to me. I couldn't do it. So I gave it back to Mr. Sims.
Who else was practicing law in Alamo in 1938?
John Buchanan Avery, Sr., Fred P. Warren, S. Homer Tatum, Roger German, and I believe Mr. W.F. Poston maybe practiced for a few months after I was here.
Tell me what your practice was like during those days, Dad.
Well, back then you had to build a practice.
How did you go about building yours?
It was very slow. You participated in every public event you were requested to participate in. I acted as chairman and co-chairman of the Red Cross drives, Boy Scout, Girl Scout, Cancer, Heart, what have you. You were invited to make graduation talks to the various high schools, and generally meet the people.
Were you able to pay your 4 months rent that first month you were in, $4 rent that first month you were in practice?
I had a good month that month.
Tell me about it.
I made $78.17. And I thought, man, if I can keep this up.
What were your charges back then for the instruments you were drafting, for example?
We got $2.50 for a warranty deed, $3.50 for a deed of trust, and we typed them. They were not on forms, we typed them. And I'll never forget once George Lewis was out here after he'd been practicing several years, and I was typing a deed of trust. And he said, "You mean you doing that from memory?" And he couldn't imagine you sitting there typing a deed of trust. Of course, they use forms, but we got $3.50, we got $35 for a divorce. And
so what was your big fee that month? Do you recall?
The Bank of Alamo had given me a note. Note and deed of trust. And I did not have to foreclose by writing a letter. I had been successful in making the collection, and my fee was $78.17.
So that was the entire fee?
That was the entire fee.
Wow.
one client.
Were you able to save any of that $78.17?
Well, I don't recall about that. No.
Who was the chancellor here then, and who was the circuit judge?
When I first started practicing law, Tom C. Rye, who had been a governor, former governor, Tom C. Rye was a chancellor, and he was hard on young lawyers. Man, I mean, he made you toe the mark, and he tried to embarrass you, and it is pretty rough practicing under him.
Did he ever show any humor in the courtroom?
Well, actually, a year or two after I'd been practicing law, the most humorous thing that I ever saw in the courtroom occurred under him. It was the only time I ever saw him express any humor of any kind. There was a divorce case, and back in those days you had divorce from bed and board. Certain causes you could give a divorce for bed and board. The theory was give them 6 months to cool off and be separated, and maybe they could get back together and so forth. This young couple, I do not remember the couple, but I remember the girl's mother's name was Mrs. Cathy. And she was testifying. The 6 months period was over, and they were back to determine about whether or not to grant the absolute divorce and about the custody of the child. There was a young boy child, male child, and Mrs. Cathy was testifying. I'll call the couple's name John and Jane Doe because I do not remember his name. But John had brought the child back. The child was not clean. The clothes were dirty. The shoes were worn. Just in a terrible state. And Lawrence Morgan, who had been Speaker of the Senate, he was from Brownsville, Tennessee, an absolute fine lawyer, Washington and Lee man, just a regular Southern gentleman, and always dressed, I mean, just in the best of taste. Very formal, and he was there and cross-examined Miss Cathy, and he said, "Now, Miss Cathy, isn't it true when Joe brought that child back that he brought 2 pair of little pants for him?" Miss Cathy said, "No, Mr. Morgan, he did not." "And didn't he bring 2 pair of socks and 2 pair of shoes?" She said, "No, Mr. Morgan, he did not." You could tell she was getting irritated. He said, and Miss Cathy, didn't he bring back 2 little blouses for them?" "No, Mr. Morgan," said, "if you don't believe me, you can go out in my house and look in my drawers." Chancellor Rye said, "No, Miss Cathy, I'm not going to let Mr. Morgan do that."
Did he smile when he said it?
Yeah, he smiled a little when he said it.
Who was the circuit judge, Dad?
W.W. Bond from Brownsville.
Tell us about Judge Bond.
Well, he was a good judge and had a good judicial temperament. He served for about 3 or 4 terms, I believe. and he was defeated by Judge Lyle Cherry.
Where was Judge Cherry's home?
He was from Trenton.
And how often did Chancellor Rye and his successors make it down to Alamo in those days?
Well, we had Chancellor at the court twice a year. He came one day, rule docket in May and rule docket in November. And if there was a case to be tried and you could set it at the time they were here, he would ordinarily come back and hear that case here. But if it was something that became ready for trial after he was here and in between times, you'd have to go to Paris to get an appointment, go to Paris, Tennessee, and hear it.
Rule docket is a phrase that's unique in my experience to Chancery Court. Do you recall its origin or what it means?
Well, it meant the day you could take pro confessos,
and what's
default
that?
judgment.
Okay.
Default. It is now, but it was pro confesso back then. And you could enter certain motions and certain decrees on rule docket day that you couldn't any other time.
What about circuit court? How much circuit court did we have in Crockett County in those days?
They would usually be here for probably a week at a time, three times a year.
You recall your first jury trial?
I believe my first jury trial was I was appointed to represent a man by the name of Festus Butler, who had been a deputy trustee
Of Crockett County?
at Crockett County and was accused of embezzlement.
Where did that trial take place?
Took place here at the courthouse.
Do you remember who the Attorney General was that prosecuted that case?
It would have been Lemmy Lee Harrell.
What year was that?
That would have been about 1939.
Tell us about the trial.
Well, we entered a plea of not guilty, and during the trial, the state auditors kept talking about floating items, meaning checks between banks that were being transferred and going through the exchange and so forth. But I could see that the jury didn't understand exactly about floating items, and they it looked like it sort of irritated them, and a large part of the state's case was based somehow, I've forgotten how now, about the floating items. So in the summation, in the defense, I capitalized on that, and I told the jury that they were trying to convict this man on floating items, and I didn't believe that they'd want to do that.
What'd they believe?
Not guilty.
Congratulations. Yeah. Was it about during those years when you first met Mother?
Yes, I met your mother, I guess about, I'd known her, of course, almost all her life, but I started dating her in about 1939, 8 or 9.
Where were you living then?
I was living where I was born with my mother on West Main.
What sort of entertainment did you and Mother have during your courtship here in Alamo?
Well, mostly going to the movies. There were 3 movie houses in Alamo at that time.
Where were they?
2 on the south side of the square and 1 on the west side of Court Square.
And what was your mode of transport on your dates with Mom?
Well, of the first, about the first year, we walked because I had no car. And your mother was Sarah Martha Avery. She was J.B. Avery, John Buchanan Avery's only daughter. And she very gently indicated to me that it would be nice if I had an automobile that we could drive back and forth to the movie. So I got busy and bought an automobile.
What kind?
Second-hand Chevrolet, gray-colored sedan I bought from a cousin of mine in Memphis who was in the used car business, James Roberts.
What was it like to date the daughter of the big lawyer in Alamo, transport her around in a gray Chevrolet sedan?
Oh, it was great.
When did y'all marry?
In 1941, June 10th, 1941. But let me tell you, it was especially nice when on one occasion, with her brother J.B. Avery Jr. and his date, they let me take their daughter to Memphis to the Peabody Roof. When Isom Jones was playing there, and on the Peabody Roof with a warm breeze blowing across and the stars up above and the beautiful music, man, you thought you was in heaven.
You were pretty close.
We married June 10th, 1941. At that time, I was mayor.
When had you been elected mayor of Alamo?
About a year before that. And at that time, I was the youngest mayor in the state of Tennessee. We had an escort away from the church. The volunteer fire department and the chief of police had the squad car there and took Sarah and I from the church to the Avery home where the reception was, with the fire engine in front of us with the siren on, and made a big to-do over it.
By that time, had you begun to do some of the abstracts for the Milan Army ammunition plant?
Yes, I believe I did that in 1940.
What did they pay you for a title abstract in those days?
I believe that the ones that I did in Trenton for the Gibson County portion of the Milan Arsenal were $25 an abstract.
Where were you and Mother on the 7th of December in 41?
We were in Waverly, Tennessee, visiting her brother, who at that time had gone with as an attorney title attorney for TVA, and was in Waverly. And we went with her father and mother to Waverly to see her brother, and he came out and met us at the car and told us about Pearl Harbor.
What do you remember him saying?
He said the Japanese have just attacked Pearl Harbor and done lots of damage.
What were your feelings then? What was going through your mind?
Anger. Resented really the sneaky manner in which they'd done it, as well as the damage that they had done. It was more anger than anything else.
During that, excuse me, go ahead.
That's it.
During that winter, is that when you began working on the title abstracts for Fort Campbell, Kentucky?
Yes, yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, Alec Gray from Brownsville, attorney at Brownsville, who had been an attorney for the Federal Land Bank, title attorney, was practicing in Brownsville, and he got the contract for the making of the Stewart County abstracts. They gave us $35 for those abstracts, but they had in the fine print that none of us were aware of until we sent our first abstracts in, and they sent them back and said, your contract calls for you to make curative recommendations. So we had to write the curative recommendations for curing the title. And they gave us $35 apiece for that. It was the coldest winter I can remember. It got 8 below.
Where did you live?
At the Cherry boarding house.
In Dover, Tennessee?
In Dover.
Who were the other residents of that boarding house that winter?
Alec Gray, Jimmy Dixon, Joe Taylor, and a man by the name of Mahon. I don't remember his given name. All of them were lawyers from Brownsville.
And were they working on
They were
Fort
working
Campbell?
on abstracts.
What was life in the Cherry boarding house like in the winter of 41, 42?
It was drafty and terrible.
Did you board there as well?
No. We ate at a restaurant and usually ate canned foods, boiled eggs, something that would not be handled, food that wouldn't be handled.
Okay, so it's 1942 now and the world is carrying on a war. Did you get involved in that?
Yes, my brother-in-law, J.B. Avery Jr., and I both made application to the Navy for, I believe they called it the V8 training. And his ensign commission came through before he was drafted. I was drafted and inducted at Fort Oglethorpe, and was sent to Keesler Field in Alabama.
Mississippi.
Air Force. Keesler Field, Biloxi, Mississippi.
Yeah, they did a play.
And my commission, then ensign commission, came through. The commanding officer there called me, called me to his office and told me that I had been issued an ensign commission and wanted to know if I wanted to accept it. And I very cordially accepted it.
What were you training for at the time?
Tail gunner. And we had a sergeant from New York City who hated the South and everything Southern. And he volunteered us, everybody under his control, he volunteered us for KP duty every weekend. And he would go into Biloxi. It would relieve him of any further duties. And we did KP every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. That was from 3 o'clock in the morning until 11 at night.
Did you ever get to accept that commission?
No, they were giving me a physical preliminary to a discharge in the Army, and they detected a lesion, a minimal lesion on my left lung, and sent me to Outwood, Kentucky to a tuberculosis hospital.
How long were you under treatment for TB?
Well, I was there until I believe about December the 24th, and they allowed me to be discharged because my physical condition had deteriorated while I was there, and they allowed me to be discharged to go to the Baptist Hospital in Memphis to Dr. Carr, Dwayne Carr, a specialist.
How long were you there?
I was there for 10 days, and then he sent me to Dr. Leland Johnston in Jackson, who was the founder of the Jackson Clinic and modern-day medicine in Jackson, Tennessee. So I was under his care for about a year.
When were you able to get back into the practice of law?
About 2.5 years later.
And was your brother-in-law home from the Navy by then, J.B. Avery Jr.?
No. No, he was not.
When did he get back?
He got back, I believe, about a year after, approximately a year, I guess, after I started practicing law again.
What was your father-in-law doing by then, John Buchanan Avery?
Well, John Buchanan Avery Sr. had been appointed a referee in bankruptcy for West Tennessee, and under Judge Anderson, federal Judge Anderson. And after that, he...
was that Judge Hugh Anderson?
No, no. After that, he was appointed to the Public Utility Commission, and served on that. He was then ran for another term and was successful in the statewide election. And they had as attorney for the Utility Commission a young lawyer from Dixon, Tennessee, Frank Clement. And when Frank Clement announced for governor, Gordon Browning, who was governor and he was running against, brought all sorts of pressure on Buck Avery to fire Frank Clement from his job on the commission. And Judge Avery refused to do it, and that caused a very strong bond between the two men, J.B. Avery and Frank Clement. And Frank later appointed him as to the Court of Appeals.
Now, when my Uncle J.B. Jr. gets back from the Navy and sets up his, or reestablishes his law practice in Alamo, and you're married to his sister, were y'all ever partners professionally in the practice of law?
No, we occasionally were associated.
Were you ever business partners with him?
Yes, we owned a lot of farming operations. We bought a lot of real estate and bought an apartment, Sherwood Apartments in Jackson, Tennessee.
Did the two of you ever wind up on opposite sides of a case?
Yes, we did.
Tell us how it felt to be opposite your brother-in-law when you were going to trial.
Well, it felt like you had to work a little harder.
Why is that?
Well, you had to show people that you were at arm's length, or they would quit employing you in cases where the other was involved.
Dad, how did you get involved in Tennessee Bar Association activities?
Well, we had no real organized local bar, and I just felt the need to know and associate with my fellow lawyers, and your mother and I started attending the conventions, and we enjoyed them. When we started back in the early 40s, we knew absolutely no one. But we went and we introduced ourselves and we met people, and they began to know us, and then it came a time when we knew everybody. And now it's gone the full circle. I know very few when I go to the convention.
Tell us about...
There's so many of the younger lawyers that I do not know, but I felt a real need to know and pick the minds of other lawyers. My friend Shep Tate, and B.B. Gullett, and Foster Arnett, and those people. And we would trade stories, and sometimes you'd learn some things about the law that you didn't already know.
We've been at it now for about another hour, and we're going to take a little break and come back and finish this interview up.
All right.